The first thing I saw when I opened the apartment door was a thin trail of blood crossing the hardwood floor, disappearing beneath the hallway table where my roommate had left a pair of trembling handprints. Before I could drop my suitcase, Claire Whitmore stepped out of the kitchen, her face pale, her sweater stained, and her eyes swollen from crying. She moved close enough that I could feel the fear coming off her, then whispered, "You won't be sleeping tonight." It was barely 11 in the morning, sunlight was pouring through the windows, and yet those words made the entire apartment feel suddenly dark. Before I tell you what Claire had been hiding and why that day changed both of our lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Your support helps our community continue sharing stories that remind us no one is beyond healing. My name is Garrett Holloway, and until that morning, I believed I understood the woman who had shared my apartment for nearly 2 years. Claire was 31, worked as an assistant librarian, labeled every container in the refrigerator, and apologized to furniture whenever she bumped into it. She kept her half of the apartment painfully neat and spent Sunday afternoons rescuing dying houseplants from discount racks. We were not romantically involved, despite what friends occasionally assumed. We were simply two people who had met through a rental listing at exactly the right moment. I needed a roommate after a broken engagement left me with a lease I could not afford alone. Claire needed somewhere safe after what she vaguely described as a difficult family situation. We respected each other's silences, shared groceries without keeping score, and built a quiet friendship around coffee, old movies, and the unspoken agreement that neither of us would ask questions the other was not ready to answer. That I had just returned from a 5-day work trip to Denver. My flight landed early that morning, and I had spent the ride home imagining a shower, a sandwich, and several hours of sleep after preparing presentations until sunrise. Instead, I stood frozen in the entryway, staring at the blood. Claire quickly explained that it was not hers. She led me toward the living room, where an elderly man lay unconscious on our couch beneath a wool blanket. His silver hair was damp with sweat, his breathing shallow, and a bandage had been wrapped clumsily around his forearm. Beside him sat a battered brown suitcase, a bottle of heart medication, and an old photograph showing Claire as a little girl standing beside the same man. Her smile in the picture was enormous. His hand rested proudly on her shoulder. Claire told me the man was her father, Everett Whitmore, and that he had appeared outside the apartment shortly after sunrise. He had collapsed near the stairwell after cutting his arm on a broken railing. She had called for medical help, but a citywide accident on the expressway had overwhelmed emergency services, and the dispatcher told her to keep him conscious until paramedics arrived. Claire's hands would not stop shaking as she spoke. I asked why she seemed more terrified of him waking up than of him dying. Her expression tightened, and she looked toward the couch as though the unconscious man could still hear her thoughts. Then she admitted that she had not seen him in 14 years. When Claire was 17, her mother, Mary Ann, died after a long battle with cancer. Everett had been a respected high school principal then, known for his polished speeches and strict sense of responsibility. But grief changed him. He stopped going to work, began drinking, and turned every room in their house into a place Claire had to enter carefully. He never struck her, but he wounded her in quieter ways. He blamed her for looking too much like her mother. He forgot to pick her up from school. He sold Mariana's piano without warning and used the money to pay debts Claire had not known existed. On the first anniversary of her mother's death, Everett disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he accused Claire of abandoning him because she had accepted a university scholarship in another state. Their final argument ended with him telling her that if she walked out, she should never come back. Claire did walk out. She had carried those words ever since. She built a life by pretending the past was a locked room. She earned her degree, changed cities, and avoided every message Everett sent through relatives. She did not attend his retirement ceremony. She ignored 3 Christmas cards, 2 birthday letters, and 1 voicemail she deleted without listening to the end. She knew he had eventually stopped drinking, but forgiveness felt too much like saying the damage had not mattered. So when he appeared outside our building that morning, older, thinner, and carrying a suitcase, she assumed he had come to ask for money or a place to stay. Then he collapsed before explaining anything that I knelt beside Everett and checked his pulse. It was rapid but present. His eyelids fluttered, and he murmured Claire's name. She backed away so quickly that she hit the wall. I had never seen her frightened like that. Claire was the person who handled emergencies calmly, who once stopped traffic to rescue a dog from an intersection, who sat beside me for 6 hours when my former fiancé returned my belongings in cardboard boxes. But in front of her father, she seemed 17 again. That I told her we needed to focus on keeping him alive until help arrived. She brought clean towels, water, and the medication list from his suitcase. As we searched for identification, an envelope slipped from the side pocket. Claire's name was written across it in shaky handwriting. She refused to open it. I placed it on the table and said nothing, though every instinct told me that the letter contained the reason Everett had traveled so far. Nearly 40 minutes passed, and still no ambulance arrived. Everett woke briefly, confused and gasping. When he recognized Claire, tears appeared in his eyes. His lips formed an apology, but Claire turned away before he could finish. He tried to sit up, then winced and clutched his chest. I called emergency services again, and the dispatcher instructed us to give him the prescribed medication under his tongue. Claire held the tablet but could not make herself move toward him. Her breathing became uneven. She said she could not touch him because every time she looked at his face, she saw the man who had watched her leave with one suitcase and never followed her. I understood more than she realized. My own father had vanished when I was 12, choosing another family and sending occasional checks as though money could replace presents. For years, I told myself I felt nothing. But when he died, I discovered that anger does not disappear when the person who caused it is gone. It simply loses its destination. I told Claire that helping Everett survive did not erase what he had done. Mercy was not approval. Saving someone's life did not require surrendering the truth. Claire finally crossed the room. Her fingers trembled as she placed the medication beneath his tongue. Everett stared at her with such raw shame that the years between them seemed to gather in the silence. Claire remained beside him until his breathing steadied. Then she stood, walked to the window, and cried without making a sound. At noon, sunlight filled the apartment so brightly that every object seemed exposed. There was no darkness to hide inside, no evening shadows to soften what had happened. Claire opened the envelope. The letter was only 3 pages, but it took her almost half an hour to read. Everett wrote that he had been diagnosed with advanced heart failure. His doctors had offered treatment, but his condition was worsening. He had not come to ask Claire to care for him. He had come to give her documents concerning a small house in Vermont that had belonged to Mariana's parents. Everett had transferred the property into Claire's name. He also included years of letters he had written but never sent because he believed apologies delivered only to ease the guilty person's conscience were another form of selfishness. He confessed everything without excuses. He wrote that grief had not made him cruel, it had only revealed how weak he had become. He admitted that Claire had been a child carrying responsibilities that belonged to him. He acknowledged every forgotten school event, every broken promise, and the terrible words he spoke when she left. He wrote that he had gone after her that day but arrived at the bus station moments too late. He watched her bus turn onto the highway and lacked the courage to call because he feared hearing her say she no longer loved him. The final paragraph broke her. Everett wrote that he did not expect forgiveness. He only wanted Claire to know that none of his failures had ever been her fault. He ended by saying that she had been the best part of his life, even during the years when he was the worst part of hers. Claire folded the letter, pressed it against her chest, and sank to the floor. I sat beside her. She confessed that for 14 years she had imagined this moment. In some versions, she screamed at him. In others, she shut the door. Sometimes she imagined he would arrive healthy and confident, allowing her to reject him with the same finality he had once rejected her. She had never imagined him unconscious on her couch, stripped of pride, carrying a suitcase full of regret. The paramedics finally arrived shortly after 1 in the afternoon. Everett's blood pressure was dangerously low, and his heartbeat was irregular. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, he regained consciousness. His eyes searched the room until they found Claire. He raised his injured hand, not reaching for her exactly, but offering her the choice. Claire hesitated, then she took it. The hospital, the waiting area was crowded and bright. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across the polished floor in golden rectangles. Claire and I sat side by side while doctors stabilized Everett. She reread his letter repeatedly, sometimes with anger, sometimes with tenderness, often with both. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a door that suddenly opened. It was a hallway people crossed one painful step at a time. A cardiologist eventually told us that Everett had suffered a serious cardiac episode, worsened by exhaustion and dehydration. He had traveled by bus for nearly 20 hours because he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he waited for a flight. His condition was severe, but the immediate crisis had passed. He would remain under observation and begin a new treatment plan. When Claire entered his room, I stayed outside. Through the glass panel, I watched her stand near the bed with her arms folded. Everett looked smaller beneath the white sheets. They spoke quietly for nearly an hour. I could not hear the words, but I saw Claire's expression move through years of pain. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes filled. At one point she turned toward the door as though she might leave, but Everett said something that stopped her. Then she pulled a chair closer. Later, she told me he had apologized without asking her to comfort him. He did not blame grief, alcohol, loneliness, or fear. He said he had failed her because he chose his pain over her safety. Claire told him that his apology could not return her adolescence or erase the years she spent believing she was difficult to love. Everett said he knew. She told him she was not ready to forgive everything. He said he would be grateful if she forgave nothing but allowed him to tell the truth before it was too late. That answer changed her. Claire did not give him the dramatic reunion people often expect from stories about broken families. She did not fall into his arms or pretend the past had vanished. She simply told him he could call her when he was discharged. It was a small offer, cautious and imperfect, but Everett began crying as though she had given him his life back. Over the following weeks, Claire established boundaries. Everett moved into an assisted living community near his medical clinic rather than into our apartment. They met for lunch in public places, always during the daytime. At first, their conversations lasted only 20 minutes. Claire asked questions she had buried for years. Everett answered even when the truth made him look terrible. Sometimes she left angry. Sometimes she returned home exhausted. But slowly, the man she remembered and the man sitting across from her became two separate people. One could not erase the other, yet both could exist in the same story. I changed too. Watching Claire confront her father forced me to examine the resentment I carried toward mine. I could not speak to a dead man, but I could stop letting his abandonment define every relationship I entered. I had spent years leaving people emotionally before they could leave me physically. That fear had helped destroy my engagement, though I had always blamed the breakup entirely on my former fiancé. Claire's courage made me begin therapy. For the first time, I admitted that appearing independent was not the same as being healed. 6 months later, Everett invited Claire and me to the Vermont house. We arrived on a clear autumn morning. The property was modest, with weathered blue shutters and a maple tree glowing red beside the porch. Inside, covered beneath a sheet in the front room, stood Mariana's piano. Everett had spent years searching for it after selling it during his worst period. He eventually found the buyer, repurchased it, and restored it one careful piece at a time. He had intended to surprise Claire but became ill before arranging the delivery. Claire removed the sheet and touched the keys. The first note trembled through the room. She had not played since her mother died. Everett stood near the doorway, afraid to come closer. Claire began the song Marianne used to play while making breakfast. Her hands stumbled at first, then remembered. By the final verse, Everett was crying. So was I. When the music ended, Claire looked at her father and told him she could not give him back the years they had lost. But she was willing to stop losing the years they still had. That was the moment forgiveness truly began, not as a denial of pain, but as a decision that pain would no longer control every tomorrow. Everett lived another 3 years. They were not perfect years. He and Claire argued, reopened wounds, and occasionally went weeks without speaking. Yet they also celebrated birthdays, restored the Vermont house, planted a garden, and created new memories strong enough to stand beside the old ones. When Everett eventually passed away on a sunny spring afternoon, Claire held his hand. Her grief was deep, but it was clean. Nothing essential had been left unsaid. The morning after his memorial, Claire and I sat on the porch of the Vermont house with 2 cups of coffee. She reminded me of the words she had spoken when I returned from my work trip, "You won't be sleeping tonight." Then she smiled and admitted that she had said them because she believed Everett might die on our couch and she could not bear to face it alone. She had not known that the long day ahead would awaken parts of both of us that had been sleeping for years. Sometimes the person who hurt us changes. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes reconciliation is possible, and sometimes distance is the healthiest form of peace. Forgiveness does not always mean reopening a door. It can mean releasing the belief that another person's failure determines our worth. Claire learned that offering mercy did not make her weak. Everett learned that remorse only matters when it accepts consequences. And I learned that healing begins when we stop pretending we were never wounded. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about someone you have forgiven, someone you hope to forgive, or a burden you are finally ready to release. Your words may remind another person in our community that healing is possible, even after years of silence. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. The past cannot be rewritten, but sometimes, through honesty, patience, and courage, its final meaning can change. Claire could not recover the childhood she lost, and Everett could not undo the father he had once been. But in the bright hours they were given, they built something neither of them believed was still possible, not a perfect ending, but a truthful one, filled with redemption, forgiveness, and enough love to finally let them rest.